It was the winter of 1983 when I booked a cabin for a 3-night stay. Just 3 nights, time I desperately needed to relax and recover. 2 months earlier, I had suffered a heart attack, an excruciating and harrowing ordeal I wouldn't wish upon anyone. The pain had ripped through my chest, arm, and jaw, leaving me sprawled on my kitchen floor until I lost consciousness. When I woke days later, I found myself in a hospital bed, thanks to my daughter Jen, who had discovered me in time. For that, I was endlessly grateful. The cabin was meant to be a retreat, a place far removed from the chaos of my life. I needed an escape. From the wreckage of a failed marriage, the strain of a faltering career, and the haunting memory of facing death itself. Comfort had become a stranger to me, while fear had taken up permanent residence. Every beat of my heart felt magnified, each irregular rhythm a seed of terror. The very thing that sustained my life had become a source of constant dread, a cruel irony I couldn't ignore. I moved through life cautiously, like fragile glass, afraid that even the slightest stress might shatter me. The doctors had done their part with surgery and medication, but now it was my turn to aid in my recovery. I was told to rest, engage in light physical activity, and avoid stress or surprises. But how does one avoid the unexpected? By its very nature, a shock cannot be anticipated. It hides in the shadows, waiting to ambush, a wrong turn, a knock at the door, or a phone call bearing bad news. The advice seemed absurd, yet there I was, preparing to follow it by seeking the tranquility of the countryside. At first, I resisted. I nearly stayed home, counting the beats of my heart as though each one was a step closer to the end. Memories flooded my mind during those quiet, haunting hours. I thought of Shu, of the years we'd spent together and how it all unraveled. There was a time when we were happy, but I had played my role in our downfall. She had visited me in the hospital, perhaps with the hope of reconciliation, but the chasm between us was insurmountable. Our conversation was polite but hollow, filled with the meaningless small talk that lingers in hospital wards. When she left, she briefly touched my hand, and I knew the spark we once shared had long since faded. Some wounds, I realized, cannot be healed by time alone. In those bleak, lonely days, my daughter was my lifeline. Her presence, even if only 2 days a week, gave me a reason to hold on. Yet she spent most of her time with her mother, and often questioned whether I had failed her too. I knew my shortcomings as a husband, but I had always thought of myself as a loving father. Still, the days apart from her were filled with fear and self-doubt, and I couldn't shake the suffocating sense of worthlessness. Friends, family, and doctors all encouraged me to take a holiday, but I was paralyzed by the fear of my heart failing. My anxious mind conjured endless scenarios of disaster. It was only thanks to G, who visited me regularly with his humor and optimism, that I finally summoned the courage to take this trip. His unwavering encouragement helped me take that first step toward healing. Eventually, I let myself be convinced. Jai finally persuaded me that a few days in the countryside might do me good. Still, I couldn't shake my fear of isolation. What if I had another heart attack? What if it was fatal? Even if it wasn't, I worried I'd be too far from help. I needed a place where I could find solace, but not so remote that modern medicine couldn't reach me. That's why we chose Blackwood Cabin. Jai had fond memories of visiting it as a child. It sat on the edge of a dense forest, flanked by an open patch of land and a serene flowing river. Despite its secluded feel, the cabin was only 6 miles from a hospital near a small town bordering the forest. That, along with Jai's promise to stay with me, was enough to reassure me that help was close if I needed it. As we left the city, I felt my anxiety begin to ease. The drive was a welcome distraction. Jai and I reminisced about our university days, laughing and sharing stories as the cityscape gave way to the wild, untamed beauty of the countryside. For the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of positivity. Only once did I mention Sui and the pain of our separation. Jai, ever the optimist, quickly shifted the conversation to something lighter, as he often did. Though I still held out hope that Sue and I might reconcile, hope itself had become a heavy burden. I tried to push thoughts of her aside, focusing instead on the road ahead. The single-lane road leading to the cabin twisted and turned through Blackwood Forest, its serpentine path stretching for 6 miles. When we finally reached the clearing, I saw the cabin, a small, aging structure standing in the middle of a waterlogged field. The ground was so saturated we had to park several hundred feet away to avoid getting stuck. The cabin itself was modest, with a single main room housing a wood-burning stove, and 2 cramped bedrooms at the back. Its weathered timber beams sagged under the weight of time, and the air was thick with the scent of moss and bark. On the far side of the cabin, the river flowed gently, its rhythmic bubbling adding to the peaceful yet mysterious atmosphere. The first day passed without incident, which was exactly what I needed. I spent the morning with a book by the fire, the warmth of smoldering logs soothing my nerves. In the afternoon, I sat on the cabin steps, watching the river's winter currents surge. Looking out toward the forest, I understood the cabin's name. The woods were dense and dark, an imposing wall of evergreen trees that seemed both alive and inscrutable. The clearing offered a brief respite from the forest's encroachment, but it was clear that nature reigned supreme on all sides. As the day waned, Jai discovered an old book tucked away on a dusty bookshelf in one of the bedrooms. Its yellowed pages and warped cover revealed its age. It had been published in 1967. The title, The Beast of Blackwood Forest, piqued our curiosity. The book chronicled a local legend about a monstrous creature said to haunt the woods. I had heard whispers of this tale in my younger years, having once dated a girl from a nearby town. Back then, the story was a favorite among the locals. Everyone claimed their uncle or cousin had seen the beast. Though I had always dismissed it as fanciful nonsense, the book was surprisingly compelling. Its vivid descriptions and first-hand accounts stirred my imagination. Though I tried to dismiss the unease it caused, shadows outside the cabin seemed to shift with the growing darkness, but I forced myself to focus on the reality at hand. My mind, still fragile from my recent ordeal, didn't need the added stress of fictional horrors. After dinner, Jai surprised me with a bottle of my favorite whiskey, a 16-year-old Lalin. I knew the doctors would disapprove, but the thought of savoring its warm, golden liquid brought a sense of normalcy I hadn't felt in months. It reminded me of better times, sitting with my wife and daughter, enjoying the simple pleasures of life. A few sips couldn't hurt. As we played cards and reminisced about our university adventures, I felt a fleeting sense of strength and contentment. For the first time in what felt like forever, life seemed just a little brighter. I would have gladly stayed in that moment of comfort and nostalgia forever, wrapped in the warmth of old memories and the temporary reprieve from my worries. But, as fate would have it, peace was fleeting. Around 11:00 p.m., the log burner was running low and we were nearly out of firewood. Jai, emboldened by the whiskey and his usual bravado, grabbed a flashlight and insisted on heading out to gather more wood. Despite my instinct to protest, I let him go. He was a good friend, and his determination to let me rest without lifting a finger was characteristic of him. Braver than me, Jai was undeterred by the cold or the darkness. Still, the lingering thought of something lurking in the woods gnawed at the edges of my mind. I watched him through the window for a moment, the beam of his flashlight bouncing across the frozen grass. At one point, the light dipped as he stumbled, his drunken laughter carrying back to the cabin. Smiling, I returned to my book, a light-hearted Ellery Queen mystery, far less ominous than the tales I had read earlier. Time slipped by, and I realized how eerily quiet the cabin had become. The usual hum of life outside was absent, replaced by a stillness that felt unnatural. I couldn't shake the growing sense of unease. Then, the door burst open and Jai stumbled in, collapsing onto the floor. He kicked the door shut with frantic urgency, his face pale and drenched in sweat. Gasping for air, his wild, panicked eyes darted around the room. Before I could even speak, he appended a small table and wedged it under the door handle. "Help me, for God's sake," he whispered hoarsely. I rushed to his side, my own heart hammering in my chest. Together, we piled furniture against the door, though the exertion made me acutely aware of my fragile state. My pulse quickened, and I fought to calm myself, the memory of my heart attack still vivid. Jai, trembling and drenched in fear, was in no state to explain himself. He turned off the lights, plunging the cabin into darkness. Only the faint glow of a crescent moon illuminated the space, casting long shadows across the room. His gaze remained fixed on the window, his body taut with terror. "What happened?" I asked, my voice cracking, but Jai didn't answer. His silence only fueled my growing dread. Finally, after I poured him a whiskey to steady his nerves, he spoke. "There's something out there," he murmured. I froze. His words were simple yet chilling. What could he mean? There were no large predators in this part of the country, no bears or wolves to worry about. But the conviction in his voice was unmistakable. As he described it, he had been near the tree line gathering wood when he noticed movement. At first, he thought it was a trick of the rain tapping on the canopy above. Then, something emerged, large and moving directly toward him. "I didn't look back," he stammered. "But I'm telling you, it wasn't human." Though I tried to rationalize his fear, I couldn't shake the sense that he had genuinely seen something. My mind wandered back to the book we had found earlier, its pages filled with eerie accounts of a mythical creature said to haunt these woods. Dismissing it as nonsense became increasingly difficult as Jai described the figure. A strange, hunched form, moving erratically yet with terrifying speed. My own fear mounted as I considered the possibility that someone, or something, was out there. My heart raced, the pulse of anxiety as real and threatening as the shadowy figure outside. Desperate, I picked up the cabin's phone, but the line was dead. The icy silence of the receiver sent a chill through me. Then Jai whispered, his voice trembling, "It's there." I turned to the window, squinting into the darkness. At first, I saw nothing, but as my eyes adjusted to the faint moonlight, I spotted it, a hunched figure, partially hidden among the trees. It stood motionless, one arm wrapped around a trunk as if for support. Though its features were obscured by the shadows, its presence felt undeniably malevolent. I could almost feel its gaze fixed on the cabin. Who is that?" I stammered. "Keep your voice down," Jai hissed, his panic mounting. The figure didn't move, but the very sight of it filled me with dread. Jai insisted it wasn't human, recounting how it had moved through the woods. Off balance yet disturbingly fast. He grabbed the book from earlier, flipping through its pages with trembling hands. His finger landed on a passage that described the beast of Blackwood, a nocturnal creature, shrouded in legend, said to emerge from the forest only under cover of darkness. "It's just a man," I said, trying to convince both of us. Someone messing with us. But even as I spoke, I didn't believe my own words. There was something deeply unsettling about the place. The silence, the oppressive stillness, the sense that we were being watched. My chest tightened, and I sat down to steady myself, my fragile heart straining under the weight of fear. "We need to leave," Jai said, his voice firm. "Or you can stay, but I'm getting the police." I hesitated, torn between the safety of staying put and the growing realization that we might not make it through the night unscathed. Outside, the figure remained, a dark, silent silhouette against the frozen forest. "I'm going," Jai said firmly, turning to meet my eyes. "Which would you prefer?" I hesitated, still unsure if what he'd seen in the woods was an unknown creature or something explainable. But one thing was certain, I wasn't staying in that cabin alone. Hastily, I stuffed my belongings into a bag, while Jai did the same. Before leaving, we grabbed knives from the kitchen, a feeble attempt at protection. The two of us stood by the door, staring at the pile of furniture we'd barricaded it with. Quietly and cautiously, we dismantled our defenses, our nerves frayed. Then, with knives in hand, Jai slowly opened the door. The creak of the old hinges echoed into the cold, bitter night, where a light rain had begun to fall, promising heavier showers to come. Jai stuck his head out first, scanning the area, and after a tense pause, motioned for me to follow. We descended the rickety steps and rounded the corner of the cabin. There it was, our ticket home. The car was parked a few hundred feet away, its silhouette barely visible on the dirt track leading back to the road. It seemed impossibly far, given the figure Jai had seen in the woods. I slung my bag over my shoulder as Jai, ever mindful of my fragile condition, took the lead. "Keep looking around," he whispered, his voice tight with urgency. The waterlogged grass squelched underfoot, and the rain began to lash at us with increasing intensity. We moved carefully, our flashlight beams slicing through the darkness, broadcasting our position to anyone or anything nearby. I scanned the forest, the tree line, and the thickened river behind us, but saw nothing. My ears strained for sounds beyond the relentless patter of rain, but the night seemed unnaturally quiet. Then Jai froze. "What is it?" I whispered, my heart pounding in my chest. "I thought I saw something." "Moving in the tree line," he said, his voice barely audible. A crack echoed through the silence, a sound unmistakably human or animal stepping on a branch. "Come on," Jay urged, his whisper urgent. We broke into a brisk jog, adrenaline coursing through me as my lungs burned from the icy air. My thoughts fixated on my heart, thudding wildly, each beat threatening to betray me. My breath came in ragged gasps as we drew closer to the car. The faint moonlight had faded, replaced by an eerie, icy blue hue that made the world feel otherworldly. Finally, we reached the door. I pleaded, my voice trembling. Jai fumbled for his keys, dropping them to the ground. "Damn it," he muttered, bending down to retrieve them. I instinctively shone my flashlight downward, illuminating the frost-covered grass. Then I noticed something strange. Jai had stopped moving, his body rigid with fear. Slowly, I followed his gaze. On the other side of the car, two large, glinting eyes stared back at us. My flashlight revealed a hunched, hulking figure crouched behind the hood. It shivered and shifted, and as it rose, I saw its grotesque form. Wet, matted hair clinging to its pale, quivering grey skin. Its gaping mouth emitted a guttural groan, its unearthly high-pitched undertone reverberating in the air. "Run," Jai shouted. I didn't need to be told twice. Dropping my bag, I sprinted as fast as my body would allow. Each step was agony, my chest tightening as I pushed myself forward. Twice I stumbled, and twice Jai hauled me back to my feet. But the pain was growing unbearable. A sharp, stabbing itch climbing up my neck and settling in my jaw. I cried out, certain I was having another heart attack. Jai urged me on, his voice frantic. "Keep going, don't look back." We were nearing the cabin when I realized something horrible. Jai's footsteps had stopped. Turning back, I saw him standing in the clearing, facing the creature. Despite his terror, he stood his ground, a selfless act to buy me time. The beast lunged at him, its massive form shrouded in shadows. A searing pain shot through my chest, and I collapsed onto the cabin steps. But I couldn't leave him. Summoning every ounce of strength I had left, I staggered to my feet, clutching my chest as I prepared to fight. Before I could intervene, Jai appeared out of the darkness, grabbed my arm, and pulled me into the cabin. He slammed the door shut and barricaded it once more. We sat on the floor, gasping for breath in the oppressive silence. My chest throbbed, and the faint hope that the attack would subside felt slim. Jai finally spoke, his voice low and strained. "What? What was that?" "I don't know," I rasped, but it wasn't human. He held up the knife he'd used during the struggle, now smeared with a foul, black substance. "This didn't even hurt it," he murmured. We sat in stunned silence, my own condition worsening by the second. "We need to get you to a hospital," Jai said softly, his concern piercing through his own fear. "Yeah, just fly me there," I replied weakly, and we managed a brief, strained laugh. Jai stood and looked out the window. "I think it's gone," he said. "If I go alone, I can get to the car faster." I felt a pang of guilt as my fear outweighed my protests. "Be careful," I whispered, ashamed of my helplessness. He patted my shoulder reassuringly, then turned to face the darkness outside. "I can do this," Jai said, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. "It's pitch black out there, and you'd need to use a torch," I warned, wincing at the growing pain in my chest. "If you do, it'll see you." He tightened his grip on the flashlight, glancing at the kitchen knife in his other hand. "I'll flash it on and off, just enough to see where I'm going. Maybe it'll confuse it. Buy me some time to get to the car and grab the keys." "Jay, wait until morning," I pleaded, but his expression told me his mind was already made up. A part of me felt a grim comfort in his bravery, a flicker of hope amidst my despair. "Barricade the door as soon as I'm out," he instructed. I nodded, tears welling in my eyes, equal parts fear and pain for my friend. He gave me a quick hug and stepped out into the night. I shut the door behind him, bolstering it with every piece of furniture within reach. Then I staggered back to the couch, clutching my chest, and peered out the window. At first, there was nothing but the oppressive black stillness of the forest. Then came the brief, sporadic flashes of Jai's torch. Ghostly bursts of light documenting his progress. His ingenuity made me smile even in that harrowing moment. He zigzagged across the clearing, a clever tactic to keep his movements unpredictable. Crash, flash, trees. He moved closer to the car, each burst of light bringing him closer to safety. But then the light became erratic, darting in different directions. Backward, left, right. My stomach dropped. Was he lost? Or worse, was he being chased? The flashes stopped entirely, replaced by an unbearable silence. My breath caught in my throat as a final flash illuminated the scene. He'd made it to the car, the light extinguished, followed by the faint sound of a door opening. Relief washed over me for a brief moment, until I saw it. One last flash revealed the outline of a hunched figure standing behind him. Its grotesque, pale form loomed in the darkness, and then came the scream, a blood-curdling cry that pierced the night. And then nothing. Jai was gone. Grief and terror collided, and the pain in my chest surged, radiating down my arm. I collapsed to my knees, certain that my time had come as well. Agony gripped me, but my thoughts turned to my daughter. Whether or not I'd been a good father, I refused to leave her alone in this world. And Sui, could I somehow find a way to bring us back together, to rebuild what we'd lost? As long as my heart still beat, there was time to survive, time to make things right. But how? The phone was dead, and dawn was still hours away. The rickety cabin door wouldn't hold against whatever was out there. Rain lashed against the windows, obscuring the night, but I could see a faint shape limping through the darkness. Desperation drove me back to the book, the one I'd dismissed so easily before. Shielding the pages with my flashlight, I read about the beast of Blackwood. Accounts stretched back centuries, describing a stooped, grey-faced figure with a contorted back. Lurking in the forest, it was said to be drawn to greed, a punishment for selfishness and human frailty. Villagers once lined paths with torches to ward it off, the only known defense against its terror. Then came the thudding, heavy, deliberate pounding at the door. My heart raced as I stumbled to my feet, clutching the knife. "Jay, is that you?" I shouted, my voice trembling, but the response wasn't Jay's voice. It was a shrill, inhuman cry, piercing and ancient, a sound that carried the weight of the forest itself. The door shook violently as the pounding grew louder. I piled chairs, pots, anything I could find, against the barrier, clutching my ears to block out the relentless noise. Then I remembered light, the old legends. I flicked the porch light on, and the creature let out an unearthly wail that echoed through the woods. The pounding stopped. I turned on every light in the cabin, hoping to stave off the beast until dawn. But the respite was short-lived. I heard it again, a shuffle, a movement. This time the sound came from inside the cabin. My blood ran cold as I realized it was in the bedroom. The door creaked open slowly. My heart pounded, each beat a painful reminder of my fragile state. I thought of my daughter's laugh, of Sui's comforting touch. Those memories fueled me, driving me to stand, knife trembling in my hand, ready to face the nightmare that had found its way inside. I didn't know I had it in me. In sheer terror, I lunged across the room and slammed into the door. Despite my momentum, the creature's grotesque, gnarled hand forced its way through the gap. Its grey, bobbled skin glistening with rain, black, matted hair dripping. Panicking, I swung the knife but missed. For a moment, the beast hesitated, and in that fleeting chance, I thrust my hand through the gap and flicked on the room's light. A howl of pain reverberated through the cabin, and then silence. Gasping for air, I rested against the door, trembling. Finally, I worked up the courage to look inside. The window was wide open, but the room was empty. I slammed it shut and stumbled back into the main room, my heart racing. A searing pain arched through my back and needled into my chest, stealing my breath. I barely made it to the couch, collapsing into its cold embrace. "Not yet," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. "Please, God, not yet." The cabin fell eerily quiet. In the stillness, my mind drifted to memories of better days. My daughter's laughter, Jai's camaraderie during our youthful travels, and Sue's warm smile. I lay there, helpless, clinging to those fragments of happiness. But I knew time was running out. My body was giving in. I glanced out the bay window behind the couch, praying for the first light of dawn, but all I saw was darkness. If I was to survive, the car was my only hope. It was all or nothing. I steeled myself for the impossible task, only for my resolve to crumble when the creature's hideous face suddenly rose into view. Its grey, sagging skin clung loosely to its skull, weeping away to expose moist, red flesh beneath. Pressed against the glass, it stared directly at me, unblinking and vile. My heart seized, skipping a beat before hammering wildly in my chest. Pain exploded up my neck and into my jaw as the creature's green, tinged eyes bored into me. Its breath fogged the glass, its presence suffocating. Desperate, I grabbed the only object within reach, the old yellowed book, and hurled it at the window, following it with my fist. The glass shattered, raining shards on both of us. The beast let out an unearthly shriek, a sound that reverberated through the icy forest. Its thorned hands flailed wildly, grabbing at me. For a terrifying moment, I thought it would drag me outside. Then, as if nature itself intervened, the frost-covered pipe beneath its feet betrayed it. The creature slipped and fell, crashing to the ground below. I staggered to the broken window, staring in horror at what lay beneath. The creature's lifeless, eyeless face looked up at me, jaw slack, its features torn apart by my assault. But then I saw it mask. In my trembling hands, I clutched the torn remnants of its monstrous visage. Below, a man writhed in pain, wrapped in the vestiges of the hulking suit he had used to terrify me. The fall had knocked the wind from him, leaving him vulnerable. From the shadows, another figure emerged. Light, quick footsteps pattered through the darkness, and my heart shattered anew as I recognized her. She screamed and rushed to the man's side, her concern evident. Her hands trembled as she tended to him, but her face betrayed her hatred when she looked up at me. Jai. It was Jai, my closest friend, the one I had trusted most. He was the beast of Blackwood. I stared down at them, unable to summon anger, only devastation. What had I done to deserve such malice from the two people I loved most? Jai avoided my gaze as he stood, his shoulders slumped in shame. Sue glared at me with contempt, but I could see no love in her eyes, only triumph. The pain in my chest surged, and I clutched it, staggering back from the window. My body betrayed me, crumpling to the cold, hard floor. I watched helplessly as Sui and Jai embraced beneath the broken window. Tears filled my eyes, but it wasn't the betrayal or the physical pain that hurt the most. It was the words that followed. "What are we going to do about the window?" Sui asked, her voice cold and pragmatic. "I'll say he smashed it during the heart attack," Jai replied. "But maybe they'll figure it out. They won't guess anything. He'll be dead. Sui said, her tone devoid of remorse. We'll start our new life when the insurance pays out. Now, go back into the woods and head home. I'll clean up here and call an ambulance once I'm sure he's gone. Her words cut deeper than any knife, each syllable tearing at my soul. As my vision dimmed and my breath grew shallow, I thought only of my daughter, her laughter, and the family I had failed to hold together. The betrayal was complete, but even in my final moments, all I wanted was to see her one last time. And then, nothing. I almost chuckled bitterly as I lay helpless on the cold floor. All this time, I had clung to the hope that Sue's refusal to finalize the divorce was born of love. That deep down, she still cared for me, still wanted us to work. Instead, I now understood it was purely about money, how much my death would profit her. From outside, I could hear Jai slipping and cursing as he tried to climb back through the shattered window. Each time he failed, his frustration grew. After a few futile attempts, he switched tactics, trying to push the door open. But the barricade I had hastily assembled held firm, and it was clear he didn't want to break it down and leave any obvious evidence of foul play. Then he began shouting, his anger boiling over. He cursed my name, his voice echoing in the cold, rain-soaked night. I realized it was only a matter of time before he found another way inside, cleaned up the scene, and spun a convincing tale for the authorities. A heart-wrenching story of how his dear, old friend had tragically succumbed to a failing heart. My thoughts turned to my daughter, the mistakes I'd never have the chance to fix. Regret overwhelmed me as my body gave in. I passed out, certain it was the end, but fate had other plans. When I woke, I found myself bathed in the sterile white glow of a hospital room. My chest ached, but I was alive. My daughter sat beside me, her hand clutching mine tightly even as she slept in the uncomfortable chair. A doctor soon entered, explaining that I had suffered another heart attack. Thankfully, it was less severe than the first, and with time, therapy, and rest, I would recover. The police were eager to speak with me. I recounted everything I remembered, every harrowing detail of the night, from the horrifying moments in the cabin to my final collapse. They listened intently and then shared what they had discovered. Apparently, my unconscious body had been found just outside Blackwood Forest, lying on the edge of the main road near the closest town. The cabin itself had been thoroughly searched and was found exactly as I described, the window shattered, the front door locked and barricaded from the inside. There was no sign of Jai or Sui. The police reported no trace of either of them except for footprints in the mud around the cabin. 2 sets, one belonging to Sui and the other to Jai, but there was a third set as well. These prints were larger, heavier, and led away from the cabin deep into the heart of Blackwood Forest. What happened to them after that remains a mystery, one I may never solve. But as I lay in that hospital bed, holding my daughter's hand, I realized something important. Life had given me a second chance, and this time I wouldn't waste it.